This is Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Ron Rohde, Kentucky Afield's first host back in 1953. Now, I'm proud to present Charlie Baglan.
I hate it when something's out of whack. We love balance. Enough money to pay our bills, harmony between our work life and social life, and when things get out of balance, we have one focus: to get it back. We go inside outdoors to see what's in balance in the wild world around us. Predator-prey relationships, disease, and what we do that makes a difference. Know it or not, we're part of the balance out there, too. Next on Kentucky Afield Radio.
By the time you're 20, you have a good knowledge of the course you're taking in life. I'm glad I do. This year, Kentucky Nature license plates turn 20 as well. These are plates with the bobcat, cardinal, and the butterfly. Kentucky Nature license plates have helped safeguard more than 80,000 acres of wilderness areas for everyone to appreciate. And I can't wait to see what's down the road. See with me. Next time you renew, choose a nature plate and drive home your support for the great outdoors.
I have never seen anything like this.
I can't believe I waited so long.
What will you say?
My heart was pounding.
This is Kentucky. It's deer season, and it's outstanding. 237 record book deer in the last 5 years. Modern gun season opens November 14th, with archery season open now. What do you say?
Yeah. I can't believe I made the shot.
Get your license and deer permit now, and take aim on the thrill at fw.ky.gov. Welcome to Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglan. I learned in law classes back in college and also learned in communications over my life that there are two sides to every story, if not 3 or 4 or 5. And today the subject is the balance of nature in the modern world and why we hunt. To some people, it's simply seen as mean and vicious or otherwise frowned upon. To some other folks, hunting is a tradition. Their dad did it. Grandfather did it. The surplus populations allow it. The law allows it. I'm going to do it too. Other folks prefer the nutritional value of the food they hunt. They opt for the natural, organic, what do they call that? Antibiotic-free, free-range, the no added growth hormones meat like deer and fish and rabbits. That's what they get from the harvest of wild game. The side that I'm going to take is more the academic side of things, where the biology class actually meets the road. Population dynamics, overpopulation, malnutrition, famine. And we see this in human populations in the news anytime you want to look. But it also applies to deer and geese and everything else. On our Kentucky Afield Radio Facebook page, I have put the link to a video that you can watch. It's about wolf restoration in Yellowstone National Park that's out in northwestern Wyoming. And it got me thinking. The video says that with the overabundance of elk in that park, the narrator calls them deer, but they're really elk. It says that they were so numerous that they overgrazed the area. So in 1995, the park folks restored a natural predator, the wolf. And from there, it had a ripple effect. The presence of the wolf meant fewer elk, which led to greater plant growth, which led to more saplings from trees beginning to grow. Forest regeneration, more songbirds, beaver came into the mix, more bears. The ecosystem responded in every respect. If that's true or not, or exaggerated or not, I'm not sure. At least it goes to show you how much in nature is connected to everything else in nature. And this change came about simply by one factor, the addition of a predator. Maybe that could have been done by adding hunters, but in this case it was sort of the same thing, adding wolves. My guests today are experts in wildlife biology and how animal populations stabilize, decline, and expand. Laura Burford is the head of conservation education as it's taught in Kentucky schools. And Dan Figert, currently the assistant director of the Kentucky Division of Wildlife. So, Mr. Figert, what's your take on that video?
I don't think that documentary was extremely accurate. I mean, it was very idealistic
Yes.
in its portrayal of the situation. But I think the general principles apply.
I don't think Yellowstone is an isolated instance. I wouldn't think it would be. Wolves, we know, are predators, apex predators, and they kill things. And they're supposed to live. I took a look, as I know there are wolves in Wisconsin, northern Wisconsin, Minnesota. I didn't read any reports like that for those states.
I think when you're comparing Yellowstone, though, to a different state, Yellowstone is kind of like its own state where nobody lives. I mean, really. It's a totally different dynamic. There's millions and millions of acres in Yellowstone, and there are a lot of wolves. I think the last time we were there were like 13 or 14 packs of wolves. And the smallest pack had only 4 members. And, the largest pack had much more than that. There's no doubt in my mind that the elk populations and the bison, too. I'm sure I don't know that they mentioned it in that clip, but I'm sure the bison changed their behavior, too. I think bison probably have a more substantial impact on ecosystems than elk do. Again, it was such a short, a 4-minute clip that we saw on that, but I'm sure that they did see some changes in the vegetation in those areas when the herds moved. Yellowstone's kind of a unique place.
But I think what it points out is that people brought back a missing link to a wild ecosystem.
And it had more dramatic impacts than they really anticipated. And I think that's true. But to be honest, as a wildlife biologist, I'm always much more concerned with the bottom rather than the top. It was interesting to see somebody talk about bringing a top apex predator back and how that changes the system. Where we're concerned about is the bottom of the system, not the top, because if you start moving the bottom, the bugs, the insects, the plant vegetation, then things start collapsing. As a biologist trained in population biology, the bottom of the system is more important than the top, typically. And we don't think about how the impacts of the top impact the whole system as well. So it was kind of a neat perspective.
That's interesting.
You have this whole system out there that works. It's interconnected. A is connected to B, A is connected to M, and J and K. You can't do one thing to one thing and it not affect everything else.
That's true.
So in Kentucky, mankind came in, the westward expansion movement, deforestation came about, unregulated hunting. This was long before any departments of Fish and Wildlife were in play. And so market hunting killed off wolves, killed off the elk that lived in this state. Made a profound difference. And since then, we've been trying to correct, shall I call it, the folly of our ways. Because we just simply did not know.
Well, we were changing a lot. I mean, there was certainly unregulated take, but we were also changing the habitat significantly when that happens. There was kind of 2 things going on. And I think there's places where, well, certainly there were times when it was the folly of our ways that we made mistakes. But sometimes you can't go back. When people populate a state, you're not going to move the people out, so the wildlife come back and have it be exactly the same way as it was.
We're never going to have vast prairies in central and western Kentucky for buffalo to roam freely and for prairie chickens to populate the area. Those things are just gone. And we're probably, no matter what we do, we're not getting them back.
We have done a few things over the years to make better the wild outdoors. Laura, you personally were significant in bringing back peregrine falcons to the state, eastern America. Elk have been restored. Deer were restored when there was virtually few, if any. Bernheim Forest and maybe one other spot. What was it? Land Between the Lakes.
Right.
Well,
wild turkey. River otter. Go ahead.
I was saying one other species that comes to mind that sometimes will surprise you is bald eagles.
Right.
I mean, if you look at our numbers historically, we have more now than we used to, and that's a landscape change that worked in the favor of that particular species.
People get excited when they're growing by leaps and bounds, building cities and highways and building a life, building a country, building a state. I'm wondering, though, if at what point did we stop and say, hey, maybe we've gone overboard, or we are having an impact on the natural world that we didn't anticipate? Are we still finding things, hey, we didn't know we did that?
There's all kinds of things that we're still learning so much about our natural systems and how they integrate and work together that, we can't understand when you take one piece out how the cogs are going to change. I mean, it's such a complicated system sometimes. We can see it has, 5 impacts, but we can't see the other 10 or 20 that are minor and not as visible.
The discussion is the balance of nature in the modern world, in modern Kentucky. We wander further down the trail when we come back. You're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglan, and we are talking with wildlife biologist Laura Burford and Dan Figert, both with the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife, discussing the balance of nature, wild animal populations, as they coexist with people. And a lot of it will boil down to what many ecology students actually learn in the classroom. It's from a fella in Wisconsin talking about land ethics. His name was Aldo Leopold, and he had this idea about tinkering. I like this because I use this every time I'm in the garage, working on the lawnmower, for example. If you're going to take something apart, he says, make sure you keep all the parts. So when you put the lawnmower back together again, it functions as it should. He says you need to apply that concept to the land and forest and fields around you. If you take something out of that, like deer, river otter, eagles, and you don't put it back, it's not going to function the way that it's originally designed to. Give me a concrete example.
We're taking things apart now. I mean, to me, one of the most significant things that's being impacted is pollinators, for example. Not honeybees particularly, but all the other bees and bugs, not just bees, but bugs that pollinate flowers and pollinate our trees and pollinate now our crops. We're seeing drastic declines in those numbers of those species that we've really never monitored or looked at that closely before, and that's kind of scary. I mean, we don't know the kinds of consequential impacts that this is going to have in 10 years if we don't start to turn that system around a little bit.
Well, when you say we, is this your Department of Fish and Wildlife? Is this academia everywhere? Is this the Department of Forestry or Division of Water? Who is the we?
Yes.
Is it everybody?
Yeah, it's all those folks. I mean, I think it starts with, in this case, I had some talks at national levels with folks who are really study bugs and pollinators and that type of thing, and they're seeing these drastic declines. I went to a meeting in Kentucky, and they're seeing it here as well. And not only of pollinators, but like moths and butterflies and all the insect populations, or many of them, seem to be declining. And at the same time, we see these, white nose syndrome, which is it's a fungus, but has it always been here, or are bats just now more susceptible to it? I mean, we really don't know. And I wonder if the two things kind of aren't interrelated somehow, because bats eat bugs. So maybe there's something that's happening to the bug population, and particularly moths. Maybe there's something happening there that's making our bats more susceptible to a fungus that's been around. Maybe it's a new fungus. I don't know. But those are the types of interrelated connections that are fairly dramatic. And when I say we as a larger community, it's the Department of Fish and Wildlife, it's university folks, it's other state agencies, Nature Preserves Commission, it's us, and it impacts all of us in Kentucky.
I have a feeling, Laura, back in the day when you were an avian biologist, I don't know how you ever stopped being that, even though you're not employed as that. Doesn't say that in your job description these days. But any specialist, you take somebody who's a specialist in bats or snakes, frogs, turtles, deer, whatever it may be, you're going to see it from that perspective. Do you remember when you were basically in charge of restoring peregrine falcons to this state? What else you had to consider? Is this a viable project? Habitat? Predators? What had to go into that?
Well, I think with peregrine falcons, one thing is that in the eastern United States, they were gone. And so when you're talking about trying to restore a species to a landscape that's somewhat different from what they disappeared from, you do have to think about a lot. And about the case of the peregrine specifically, first of all, if we were going to restore them, we had to get some. And we had to purchase peregrine falcon chicks. And they weren't exactly like the ones that had been restored or that had originally existed in the United States, but we tried to pick something that was very close. And we picked a subspecies that was in the Rocky Mountains. And so when we purchased those chicks from a falconer who raised them, we were purchasing them. They had been raised by parent birds, of course, but we took them and put them in a very unfamiliar environment, and that's where they first learned to fly. That's where they first learned to hunt. But when we had to select those spots, when you look at historical records of where peregrines were found, as far as we know from Birds of Kentucky and some of the early historical accounts, they were found along cliff lines and bluffs in eastern Kentucky, in south central Kentucky, in places where they would have nested on the cliff lines and been raised there. Well, those areas weren't necessarily the safest place or the best place to release them. And so we went on what some of the other states that had peregrine falcon populations that they were starting to reestablish. We kind of followed their lead and released the peregrines in urban areas. And the idea was, well, that the tall cliff lines kind of would mimic tall buildings downtown, and so we released them from ledges or locations on these tall buildings. And the idea was then that the peregrines that we released there would just naturally kick in and would go back and find these other cliff line areas to propagate in, that they would do that, and the peregrines would easily make the shift between having been released in a city. Their genetic instinct would kick in, and they would go to the cliff lines and nest there.
Even though they're not from here.
Even though they're not from here. And it didn't happen. That's exactly what happened.
I was wondering, can a bird from somewhere else in the nation come here and automatically become an eastern bird?
When we selected those birds, we were selecting that genetic stock because the idea was peregrine is a neat species. They're found 6 out of the 7 continents. There's peregrines in lots of different places, but they have somewhat different migratory instincts. There are some subspecies of peregrines that don't migrate. There are some that do, that migrate quite long distances. So we were choosing this one because they would have migrated similarly. But we just thought that inherently, since their search image, what they look for, what they want to nest on, should be cliff lines and gravel, and they don't build a formal nest, so they need a place that looked familiar to them. We just assumed that when we released them, that's what they would look for to nest. And by and large, all over the Midwest, what we found was that the peregrines really just kind of stuck to the cities we released them in.
Really?
A few did something different. I mean, a few did. And so what we were doing essentially is, we were getting peregrines back out on the landscape, but they really weren't doing the same things they were prior to their decline. So we had to shift our management. We had to shift what we were doing. And what we did then was attempted to release birds in the more traditional cliffline areas, in the Red River Gorge area and that sort of thing. And what we found was that some birds would try to come back and try to nest in the more traditional cliffline areas, but some of them, even in other states, when they were released on a cliff, would still go find a nest site in the city. And what we were learning there is that really that was more of a function of peregrines attracting peregrines. They want to go where other peregrines are.
Yeah.
And so there was quite a bit of crossover. But thankfully, what we did do is we succeeded in bringing peregrines back to the landscape. We have them now. We didn't have them when I started my career. So that's something we can look back with satisfaction that we've gotten them back. But despite our best efforts as biologists and thinking we know how things are going to work, sometimes the animals have to teach us. It's just a little bit different than it used to be, but we have them back.
The 1990s was a grand time in the state of Kentucky for wildlife restoration. You talk about the bald eagles coming back where they were once endangered, falcons, river otters. We brought those up from Louisiana. I trust not exactly the same river otter Kentucky had historically. The elk that we have in the state aren't eastern elk. They're Rocky Mountain elk. But we're doing our best to put back into the fabric of the wild what was eliminated simply by the carelessness of man, but anyway, that's the way it all shook out. Now, are the animals we're bringing back Are they working out? Are they adapting? Are they adjusting? Are they doing what we anticipated?
Well, they're not doing what we anticipated, I think, in just about all cases. Laura gave you the example of the peregrine falcon and how we've learned with it. You look at white-tailed deer, you look at turkey. We're still learning stuff about those things. We thought, for example, wild turkeys, blocks of woods 10,000 acres wide, and, that's what you need for turkeys. Deer, again, large forest patches, because that's where they were at. So we went and trapped them. We started moving them around. We took them to smaller blocks, hoping that it would be, maybe big enough. You look right now, and there's deer in every town and city in the state. They've adapted. They have figured out how to deal with people, and been very successful at it, almost in some places too successful. So now, you have populations of white-tailed deer. They're in places where we can't hunt them and we can't really control them, and we never anticipated them moving into the cities and being successful. And when I say the cities, kind of the edges, the parks, it's incredible where white-tailed deer are able to live now.
Tell me about it. I live in a subdivision. It's sort of out on the outskirts of town, but every now and then, come home at night, there's a deer in the yard. Wildlife and our humble attempts to keep everything in balance, animal myths and misconceptions. Coming up, we have a fishing report and more after the break. Stay with us. My name is Charlie Baglan, and you're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. Back on Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglan. Still a half hour to come, a fishing report just ahead. If you like the show, you want to share the link on Facebook or email it to a friend, it's easy to do. You can go to YouTube and just type in Kentucky Afield Radio. And there we are, many shows we've done over the years. We are an iTunes podcast. You can also find us on myhuntingandfishing.com, and the weekly links are all there on Facebook, too, to search Kentucky Afield Radio. Back with more on the balance of nature. First up, our fishing report.
This is Jeff Crosby with the Central District Fishing Report. Largemouth bass fishing is becoming very good at many of our area lakes, such as Taylorsville, Harrington, Giss Creek, just to name a few. Currently, creek arms are very productive during this time of year, pitching pig and jig combinations around shoreline cover, as well as casting crankbaits off secondary creek points can be productive in catching a few of these largemouth during this time of year. Many fishermen are still catching some decent panfish, bluegill, and red ear at many of our small state-owned lakes, such as Beaver, Bolts, Elmer, and McNeely lakes. Fishermen are catching these fish using redworms, popeye jigs, waxworms, or crickets fished along the edges of aquatic vegetation. Grab a pole, wet a line, and enjoy some great fall fishing.
The Kentucky and Barker Lakes is starting to look like fall fishing season. The lake has fallen to close to winter pool, so you got to be kind of careful out there. The water's lower, so you got to watch for them stumps and creek channels. But it's a great time to go fishing. The water's cooling down into the upper 60s. Crappie, they're still kind of schooled up out on the ledges, but it's also a good time to maybe try some of that shallow water brush again for those crappie moving up around the shoreline, especially the black crappie. And I always like just to cast a little curly-tail jig for those black crappie up along the rocky shorelines. For bass fishing, rocks and docks is what I'm thinking this time of year, is those rocky points, those secondary points, and then around boat docks. And, of course, always in the tailwaters, you have your striped bass and your catfishing. Well, this is Paul Weister, and I hope you find a good day to go fishing.
Hi, this is Eric Cummins with your Southwest Kentucky Fishing Report. Barren River Lake is in process of turning over. The bass are scattered and at present will be moving shallow at any time, but especially focus your efforts in the upper parts of the lake above Walnut Creek and the Narrows. Crappie also are best in those upper parts of the lake near structure, brush, and channel drops. Channel cats have been good on all bait types, with fishing again best in those upper parts of the lake. Bluegill have been good all over the lake and are shallow with live bait. At Green River Lake, likewise, the lake is turning over, and bass and muskie have been good in the upper sections of the lake above Emerald Isle. Crappie also best in these upper sections near brush and structure. As always, good luck and good fishing, and be sure your life jacket's got your back.
Mo Show. After the break.
Deer in the headlights. Watch out, Mr. Deer.
Singing with your kids in the car is one way to keep deer hazard season in mind. And should a deer catch your headlights, flash those lights, sound your horn, break its concentration to scurry it along.
There's one.
And where there's one, there may be 2 or 3 more. Deer hazard season runs through November. So be wise behind the wheel while nature runs its course. A message from Fish and Wildlife and the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety. Welcome back to Kentucky Afield Radio. We're into our second half hour. The Assistant Director of the Kentucky Division of Wildlife in the studio with me, along with the Assistant Director of the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife's Division on Information and Education. It's quite a mouthful what she does. She leads the effort for conservation education in our schools. The subject is the balance of wildlife populations. And that term balance, sort of elusive. Lots of things have a hand, and once upon a time here in our fair state lived wolves and mountain lions. Today, they're gone. In their place are sportsmen, sportswomen, and sports kids. Elk were once part of the game plan prior to 1850. Elk now are back, and Mr. Figert, how are they fitting into the landscape? It has to be a fit.
Elk, we've put them in eastern Kentucky and significant grassland areas in eastern Kentucky, and they use the woods, but they also use the grasses. A lot of people in Kentucky would love to see elk move to central Kentucky and western Kentucky, but they would cause huge problems with animal damage, eating crops, and those types of things. So when we brought them back, we had the goal of keeping them in a 14, 16 county area. And we've been able to do that through hunting, and really because of these grasslands and the forests surrounding them, the elk haven't moved like some other animals. So I think that's working very well. They're doing the things that elk are supposed to do, but at the same point, they've stayed put so far where we kind of hoped they would.
Laura, I know that you have educators that go into classrooms around the state, teach young kids about nature, and it's going to go in one ear and out the other unless you make it relevant.
Well, I think we try to work that into pretty much all the programs that we do, because when you're talking about 4th through 6th graders, which is the age group that our conservation educators will visit, it seems like kids now are just really, really disconnected from the outdoors, and maybe they're not getting out as much, and they don't feel a connection to wildlife. And, you know, as a Fish and Wildlife agency, we want people to have that connection. Sure, we hope people grow up from a family where hunting and fishing is something they do together, and they have fun, and they see the benefits of that. But in reality, there's a lot of folks that just don't get out much at all, and certainly haven't had the chance to go hunting and fishing. So when we enter a classroom and we're giving our conservation education programs, the first thing that we want to do is educate the kids about what kind of wildlife we have here. And some of them are oftentimes very surprised that it's something that they may have very close to where they live. Some kids are really surprised to learn that, you know, they have raccoons, or they have possums, or they might have some of these things right on their school grounds or where they live. And what we found is that people just, you know, you appreciate something so much more if it's close to you, if it's familiar to you. And so we kind of start there and build with the programs that we give. We try to give programs that will teach the kids about the wildlife, but then also reinforce what they're learning in the classroom. We talk about ecosystems. We talk about habitat. We talk about restored species. We've done programs that just talk about kind of what we were talking about now, the deer and the elk and the turkey, how those are success stories, and about how future generations of kids will get to see those animals because of what Fish and Wildlife management agencies like our Fish and Wildlife. Some children are quite amazed to learn that we do have bear in the state, that we do have eagles in the state. So we're doing a new program called Animal Myths and Misconceptions.
Mm-hmm. What's a big myth?
Oh, well, we don't have time. This is only, how long is our discussion? There's a lot of misconception about bats. That all bats suck blood, that we have vampire bats in Kentucky, that bats get tangled in your hair, that sort of thing. So we talk about animals that might be very, very misunderstood and try to set the record straight. We feel a big responsibility to go into classrooms and answer the kids' questions and give them facts and give them a chance so they can feel very excited and connected to the environment we have outside. And we also see it as a privilege to be in the classroom, too, because the teachers are appreciative of us coming in and reinforcing what they're teaching.
One of the things that we struggle with is wildlife biologists is we look at things at population levels. Many people look at animals, individual animals, and feel sorry or empathy or a connection with a certain species of animals, whatever it might be. One of the things that we try to get people to understand is that individual animals are cute, yes, cuddly or whatever, but to maintain healthy populations of these cute little cuddly animals, we need to look at things at a population level. And so populations have to kind of stay in balance, and there has to be kind of an equalness between species. If things get out of control, if one gets too high, that causes problems. One of the things that my daughter picked up out of this is population understanding, and that populations have to be kept in check. And one of the things that we use to do that is hunting and trapping and fishing and all those types of tools that our people think of as, we call them sports, if you will, and things that people enjoy doing. Well, they're also important to maintaining these populations, particularly when some of the apex predators aren't there and the systems have been as altered as our systems are. That's an important part of what we do, not only for wildlife population, but for enjoyment as well, and bringing families together and all those types of things. Having kids understand where their food comes from. If a child goes out and shoots a squirrel and then takes it back and eats it, there's a connection there that people don't have anymore. Kids who grew up on the farm saw that in the daily activities, and they understood it in ways that our society has lost now. And I think it's good for kids to kind of see a view of that window, at least somehow, and understand all that connectedness.
So to control animal populations, back in the day when Daniel Boone was tromping through the woods, well, he had predators. I'm going to trust, wolves, mountain lions, bears.
Yeah.
And they would keep things in check, the self-sustaining system, if you will. So that with the absence of those, what do we do? Deer aren't going to just say to themselves, hey, we don't have any more wolves and mountain lions anymore, so we have to sort of limit the number of fawns we have. That conversation never takes place. The population grows exponentially.
It kind of is unchecked now. All of a sudden, they can grow out of control, if you will. And then they have impacts for deer, for example. Too many deer, you start to get what we call browse lines. They start to change the environment through too many animals. New plants that need to come on, oak trees and saplings and stuff that start small and grow big. Well, if you have too many deer eating all that little vegetation, you never get new oak trees to start growing, and eventually that causes big problems. And that's just one simple example, but it begins, I think you can begin to see how if things get out of control, all of a sudden we have no new oak trees growing, and it changes the whole forest environment at that point. We control forest fires. There's no more fires in Kentucky, not at the kind of scale that we used to see. So timber harvest kind of replaces that in a sense. And now people don't want to see trees cut. And so if we don't cut trees, that causes all kinds of other problems for a whole suite of species that depend on young timber to grow.
People just assume, well, nature will take care of itself, or the animal populations will adjust.
Sometimes it's upsetting the way nature adjusts. In an overpopulated situation, say with deer, you're talking about places where they're getting overcrowded and they're congregating, there's not enough resource, and they're resorting to alternate food sources that aren't as nutritious for them. When they're overpopulated in areas, it's an opportunity for disease to spread, so the overall health of the herd is not as good. And when mortality happens, when animals die, it's because they're sick or malnourished or injured. Also causes some problems for them in other ways. When you have overpopulated deer, In an area where there's lots of highways with lots of drivers, you're talking about increased, collisions. And so the herd size will have to be reduced, but it's certainly not in a way that I don't think anybody, including the deer, would see as an ideal situation. And so when we talk about, and especially with kids, when we talk about different sources of mortality with animals, we talk about hunting as one way that we can remove animals from the population and keep that population in check.
So are there other ways to control populations other than hunting? You talked about disease. That's going to happen. Deer-car collisions. You can hit a raccoon or possum.
Populations are going to control themselves one way or the other. Disease, starvation.
But in balance with all the other populations, as it were we man walked onto the landscape. I trust that's not going to happen anymore.
Probably not. We can't take ourselves out. We can't let systems just take care of themselves anymore because we've messed them up too much, really, to be honest. Take care of themselves is maybe not even really accurate. It's hard to think back to a time, if you really think about it and understand the history of Kentucky, for example. You talk about before Daniel Boone came over. Well, the environments were already very altered by people prior to that. There were Native Americans here. You almost have to go back, pick a time. Before people were on the environment and it was all animals, then animals took care of things, and the weather and the ice ages, and there was a different kind of a balance. But when we came, when we as in man, we started messing with things right away. We saw that if we started a fire in this grassland, it brought the buffalo in. It took care of insects. It did lots of different things. I think Native Americans had big impacts on the environment. They managed in their own way wildlife populations. When the first Europeans came across, there were thousands of Native Americans in Kentucky. When Daniel Boone came across, he talked about watching a squirrel, or a squirrel could run from one side of Kentucky to the other.
And never touch the ground.
And never touch the ground, right, from tree to tree, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
By the time Daniel Boone got here, the environment was already very altered. Because Europeans came across, we brought our diseases, and Native American populations were decimated. So all of a sudden, they didn't have the opportunity to create the fires anymore that they used to. They didn't kill all the game that they used to. Their populations had been decimated to a small percentage of what they were, and so the forest grew. And by the time Daniel Boone got here, Kentucky was a lot of trees and a squirrel could run across the state without ever touching the ground. So people have been altering the environment for as long as there have been people. Populations control themselves. They find ways. Disease is going to do it if a predator doesn't.
Back with more in our final few with the science of wildlife population management. I'm Charlie Baglan, and you're listening to Kentucky Afield Radio. We are back on Kentucky Afield Radio. This is Charlie Baglan. Back with our final few minutes with wildlife biologist Ann Figert and Laura Burford, talking about the balance of living things in the wild outdoors. With the absence of predators like wolves and mountain lions that used to live here in Kentucky, what's left to keep populations in balance with each other? We have gone this whole show without talking about something called carrying capacity.
Habitat change based on the number of animals that are here. They're going to eat all their food supply and their population's going to crash. They always control themselves one way or the other. In our world, that's what happens.
Let me read something I found on the Internet. And, of course, if it's from the Internet, it has to be true. Under 8% of the current population hunt. Don't know if that matches up with Kentucky's numbers. Can't remember who exactly put this out, but we'll just say 8% is a valid number. Wall Street Journal, Sports Afield, and other demographic researchers are saying that if current trends continue, no sport hunting by the year 2050. I wonder. Because I think programs like yours, Laura, are doing a pretty good job at teaching kids what's going on in the real world of the outdoors. But let's just say that hunting does decline. What happens then?
We would have some problems. The deer would would increase too much. If we didn't trap, we'd have too many skunks and raccoons, and the fur bear populations would increase. And at some point, something's going to change that, whether it's the habitat, they're going to eat themselves out of all their food, and the forests are going to change to a point where they don't sustain the number of deer anymore, and then their population will crash because they starve, or disease will come in. The number of deer that are going to hit by vehicles is going to go way up. There's all kinds of consequences, both environmentally, to a changing environment. It causes problems, or it causes swings, maybe not problems, but it causes changes. And those changes cause other changes, and it's a cascading effect.
I'm wondering, though, would it ever get out of hand so much with deer or raccoons or rabbits or geese that you would have to bring in an all-out assault to keep wildlife in check?
Think about taking all the hunters out and 100,000 deer, whatever. I'm not sure what our deer kill is per year due to hunting. If you took that out and the population kind of goes unchecked, there's not enough people to go out and aerial shoot deer at some point 10 years or 20 years down the road to control those populations. I mean, it's just not going to happen. And we're having the same problem with fur bears right now. It has impacts. We have distemper now. We have rabies now. We have much more of those kinds of diseases. They're what's controlling the populations now instead of trappers. So something will happen. Some populations might get controlled, and others we're not going to be able to control. They're going to find a way to control themselves.
All right, let me ask you this. Where in the United States, and buddy, I Googled this and I couldn't find an answer. Where in the United States are wildlife populations naturally in balance?
It's always a swing. If they get too big, they need to come back down. Wildlife populations are always in a state of change.
I don't know of anywhere in the lower 48 states where populations are naturally in balance.
I had heard once that northern Montana. I had also heard Denali National Park.
Now, in those two areas that you named, there aren't as many people.
Right.
The population density is much, 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 much smaller in those areas. So
the human population is.
So I would assume Siberia. Chances are it's more likely to be in maybe some of the Amazon or the Congo. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, where people are fewer.
Right. Denali's, even that is fairly impacted by people at this point, and they hunt a lot around the edges of even those wild places to help control the populations within those big, expansive parks. Even those places are impacted.
Mm-hmm.
So we won't have mountain lions and timber wolves, gray wolves, in Kentucky ever again. Those are considered inherently dangerous animals, and the population, the citizenry, doesn't want them.
They probably said that about bears, too. We didn't always have bears in eastern Kentucky, and now they've kind of made it back on their own.
Right. And coyotes the same way?
Coyotes the same way. I don't know that coyotes were ever here, but when we got rid of wolves, eventually coyotes kind of moved back or moved in.
The people are coming along behind the two of you. How's the future look?
My fear is that too many people are moving to the city and losing their connection with the natural resources and losing the connection with where food comes from. I mean, it's a little scary, not just from our standpoint of maintaining balance, but I think it's good for people to understand that, we're predators too. We eat meat. People who grew up on a farm seem to understand. Well, and also, too, kind of what we started some of these earlier conversations about was that everything has a part, too. That it's not just the things that might be the most charismatic animals or the things that we're most interested in or the things that we hear the most about, but even down to the smallest little bitty insect or little bitty critter that maybe we don't appreciate all that much. Even the mice and snakes, they have a very important role to fill in the health and the balance of the ecosystems that we have, and I hope people don't lose sight of that. I hope folks can look at it as a big picture. You take that piece out of the car. Or when you put it back together, you don't tinker well, and you've got some extra pieces. The car might still run, for a while. It might still get you where you need to go. It might not get as good a gas mileage. It's not going to, maybe, the heater's not going to work anymore. It's not going to be as efficient and do all the things that the car's supposed to do, but it might still work. But each time you take a piece out and don't put it back, there's consequences. And so we want to try to make sure that we leave enough pieces in that our system works. It's important not only to us from a wildlife perspective and from the natural resources that we care so much about and try to protect, but it's all about human population as well. I mean, when things collapse, it's going to be bad for all of us.
I have known the two of you for probably a quarter century, and I know that makes it sound old, but I've always been able to look at you two for honest answers that translate easily into English. And I'm optimistic for a brighter future. Unless there's any final thoughts, I appreciate y'all coming in and trust that the two of you still don't text and drive.
Try not to. My kids keep me from doing that.
Hard to believe. It caught them by surprise. They should know by now. I'm always going to ask that question. We are out of time. This is Charlie Baglan inviting you to join us in a week, and we'll go inside outdoors again here on Kentucky Afield Radio.